Hi, my name is Ollie Bliss and this is my channel Book Draw. For those who don't know, I enjoy looking at queer fiction and occasionally I do images about it. But today I am doing my wrap-up for the wonderful Victober. For those who don't know what Victober is, it's been organised by 4 different lovely booktubers. There's Ange, Lucy, Kate and Katie. Who created this, and they've got a series of challenges. I will add details down below of each of their channels in my description box below, so you can check them all out. I'll run through all the challenges which I met and the ones which I didn't and take you through. I just want to say though how much I have enjoyed taking part in Victober. It's really stretched my reading, it's really broadened books which I wouldn't normally pick up and read. I mean, it's books which you've always kind of gone, yeah, okay, I'll get to that one sometime soon, and you just put it off. Because contemporary books, they're fun, they're exciting, they're relevant, there's stuff happening now, but it has been really interesting to actually go back and to look into our past and see what the world was like at that time. So just thank you for creating Victober, because it has encouraged me to pick those books up finally and read some of the ones which I've always kind of wanted to give a good proper go, but have never actually been asked enough to take myself to the level of actually reading the book. So thank you. So kicking off then, going back through the challenges, I'll just read through them and let you know where I got to with each of them. So the first challenge was Ange's challenge, which is to read a book by one of the host's favourite Victorian authors. So within this I was able to read Charles Dickens for Oliver Twist, and I also read Elizabeth Gaskell, where I read North and South, and I'm currently reading Wives and Daughters. 2 very different experiences with each of those. The second challenge was Kate's challenge, which was to read a Victorian book with a proper noun. So for this one I did A Picture of Dorian Gray, which was by Oscar Wilde. That was a very different experience as well to North and South. Very, very dark in comparison. And then Katie's challenge was to read a book from the first 10 years of Victorian period and a book from the last 10 years. So I was actually able to do this through Oliver Twist, which was done at the first half, and just shy of doing the last 10 years. A Picture of Dorian Gray was published in 1890 and the last 10 years were from 1891, so just missed it. And then Lucy's challenge was to read a Victorian book written by a woman, anonymously under a pseudonym. So for this one I was going to do Vernon Lay's short story, which was The Albert Prince and the Snake Lady, but I haven't got around to it. But it is a PDF, I have started it. It's a shame, one of the pages is missing through water damage, I think, in the PDF, which I've managed to grab off online, but I have it linked down below. It's only about 54 pages long, I think, as a PDF, so it's totally worth checking out and reading if you've not read it already. There was a general challenge, which was to read a Victorian book and then watch the screen adaptation. So I have already watched Oliver the Musical. Don't know if that really counts, but I did actively watch on BBC iPlayer the TV series of North and South, and I have issues, to say a few, but I'll save that for in a minute. But there was also the bonus group read-along, which was Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. I never actually got around to doing this as a group read. I'm just reading now Wives and Daughters. A lot of people have commented and say how much they've enjoyed Wives and Daughters probably the most, which also kind of spurred me on to read it. I have to say, so far, preferring North and South. I don't know if that's controversial. I haven't read it all the way through yet, so maybe I should hold my views. But I immediately fell in love with North and South right from the start, whereas at the moment, like the first 10 chapters, I was a bit like, this Molly, she ain't no Margaret, basically. Also, I've done my previous video where I actually went over to the Elizabeth Gaskell's house and had a little rummage around there, and I've done a little video for you to check out, because I know some of you are international and it's right on my doorstep, so I felt like, why not share a bit of the love on that side. And it was just a real pleasure to actually be able to feel closer to Elizabeth Gaskell by doing that. I also really need to highlight that the reason why I've enjoyed this so much is because I did a buddy read with Milena from She Gathered Books for 2 of the books. So we first of all read A Picture of Dorian Gray, and then we read North and South together. So we had a very intensive time because it was one after another, really. And to compare the two, because the first one, Picture of Dorian Gray, I was not initially a fan of Dorian. Like the way he is described in the text, I was like, should I be feeling this way? And it was really good to actually just have Milena there to kind of go, are you? Do we like Dorian? What do we think of Dorian? And because I was very unsure, because so many people said, oh yeah, I really love that book. And I was like, I am not liking this person, at all. Right at the start of the story, there's this woman he's quite infatuated with. He then kind of dismisses her because he realises that her personality is a little ugly, but she is so traumatised by that whole situation that she ends up committing suicide. Spoilers. He is upset overnight, but then a friend of his comes over and he's moved on emotionally himself. He's kind of justified it in his mind, and the guy's like you're doing better than expected, and he's like, oh, you should have seen how I was if you only knew just merely hours after it. But you can't dwell on these things. Can I move on? And I was just like, I'm not feeling this Dorian fella at all. So I was kind of very confused why, because this is the only novel which Oscar Wilde has actually written as a full novel. I'd be like, why would you do this? Why would you write this character? And you can see there are these real close parallels to the way he is. There is clearly this key relationship between him and the person who paints the portrait of Dorian Gray, is because he has this fondness for him, which is seen as something which is wrong and bad, because he's feeling things that he shouldn't be feeling, basically. But Dorian, because he thought he had this secret, and he's like, yeah, but the painting's his facial expression is changing at me, and he's so concerned with that. He completely kind of dismisses, and I had dismissed in my mind what he's saying, because I kind of it's kind of obvious that he is in love with him, he's obsessed with him, and so you kind of I had taken that for granted, and clearly Dorian had as well, because he's like, that's not the secret that I wanted to know. I wanted to know if you could see that the painting is physically changing in front of my eyes. But it's really exploring morality, and it's really exploring how people justify things around themselves. It's how they look upon the world. It's there is this kind of social narrative in terms of people in places of privilege, and how they feel put upon by other people. Anything else but beneath that is actually it's just inconvenient, basically. And that was kind of the message that was coming through from this. But also how there is vice in the world, and the reality of taking pleasure in those things, and the kind of ugliness, and revealing it and going, this is what humanity can be like. It was kind of vile and a bit grubby, and I did feel a bit dirty afterwards. But a kind of delightful, vicey, dirty read in a lot of ways, and great to have somebody else to kind of just check your moral compass with in terms of how you feel as the situations progress. But then North and South, it was the polar opposite, because I loved it so much. I loved Margaret. So Margaret, she's based down south, and she's her whole life has been down there, and she's been ripped up and rooted up into the north, because her father has kind of rejected some of the teachers within the church, and he ends up becoming a teacher. And as discussed in my video, that there seems to be some parallels with her husband, William Gaskell, around that. So basically, Margaret sees what the North is like, and it's a very different environment, very different atmosphere, and it's about how she meets all these different situations, and it's actually quite a twisty little read. Well, it's not little at all, it's quite epic, but she goes through a lot. It's how she rises to each of the challenges that she faces, and it's how she grows and she learns, and in her way of thinking, and actually seeing that people just talk differently but have very good, wholesome values underneath, and they might act in a slightly different way, or be perceived in a different way, but there's a lot of goodness which is underneath it all. And in terms of the social commentary, it was really solid in terms of looking at the conditions for the workers. I loved seeing that through her eyes, and how she describes the places and the people and the arguments and the discussions, which are both from the voice of the worker and from the masters, and it was really, really balanced how she actually does that, and you can almost see her trying to talk intelligently to the master in terms of making them change and alter their thinking and be more empathetic and be more mindful of the value of the mass of workers and what they actually contribute, and how they give masters this level of privilege, and how necessary it is to actually. But also there was just really dramatic scenes in terms of, like, there's a riot in there's a disturbance on the train tracks, which I won't go into, but it's like the repercussions of that make you think the book is going to go in a completely different direction. There's lots of false starts with the romance, and it's interesting. I was reading like a little wiki about it in terms of these false starts at the start. It's actually removing, saying this isn't a romantic book, this is about other things which are more important than that. And it's interesting because then when I watched the TV series, I did come across quite differently. I felt like Margaret's character was a bit more impertinent, as is kind of repeatedly used. She is more kind of defensive, and she's a bit more distanced in the way she carries herself in the series. But also some of the surrounding characters were just like harsher and ruder, or it felt that way. Instead of, when I was reading it, it felt like some of the people, like Bessie, was trying to be more friendly to her, whereas in the TV series it was more of a us and them mentality right from the start. It felt like they had kind of washed over all the issues that are important within the theme of the book, and focused on the romantic trials between the two lead characters, which was just a little bit disappointing. And it was also quite patronising in some of the language that they didn't use, because it might not have like appeared in our vocabulary by today's standard, but also in terms of some of the softer nuances were actually lost, and they didn't carry those forward. And I just felt like that was a bit of a shame, but I can understand it to a degree because it's television and it's got to be kind of directly at the person. But in the book there are non-verbalised scenes which are all kind of described through body language, and those could be easily put through. For example, there is a scene between her and her brother and the mum who is sick, and it's just about them caring for the mother and being quite tender with her. And it had time to breathe with that scene, whereas it really didn't within the TV series, and I just felt like that was a missed opportunity. And then at the end, they just changed things. they just made it a bit softer and a bit nicer. It was nice that they actually didn't kill off one of the characters, and that they retire instead, which I thought was quite nice, seeing as there is quite a significant number of deaths in the book. So I thought that was plausible, and I thought actually it was probably a fairer way of disposing of characters who you've used and you don't need to carry on any further, and just go, oh yeah, they just went off and retired, it's fine. Whereas in the book, Elizabeth Gaskell seems to be like, I can probably kill this character now. I'm not going to use them again. It was a little bit of a nicer touch. And then finally I also read Oliver Twist, which was quite an unexpected pleasure. I think reading it as an adult has changed my level of concentration and interest for the material. But I was actually quite surprised by my level of interest in Charles Dickens' writing style, in terms of the way he observes different characters and the way he chooses to describe them in the situations, and also the context of their situations that they're in. There's a lot of humour, but there's also a lot of kind of critical wit that is thrown into the mix within it. So it's like he understands that there is a situation of poverty and a certain level of helplessness that exists within people who are poor, but then he's like very subtly criticising and taking the mickey out of those who are privileged, and revealing how little they regard other people around them, and what that actually says about their character and their virtue. And I thought it was just very subtle, very nuanced, but very clever and very enjoyable to read. I was also surprised by the different shape that the second half of the book takes. Some of the key characters, it's not as lovely and delightful as the ending as Oliver, the musical, at all. So that was kind of like, okay, that's what actually happens. I didn't know that. To kind of compare between the musical and the book, I did feel like there was a big chunk actually in the middle of Oliver Twist, which just kind of was a bit unnecessary, and actually like the musical does just chop that narrative and that section out because it is unnecessary and it doesn't add a massive amount of value to the overall story. So that was quite a bit of a trench, that part really, to plough through, but I was glad to be able to say that I have now read Oliver Twist and I know the story and I know the comparison, so I feel like I can pat myself on the back and be pleased with myself. It was good. But so those were the main reads that I did through my Victober Wrap Up. I'm sorry it's been a bit of a delay. I've just been kind of busy with work at the moment. It's been full on. It's that autumn season, so I finally have been able to pull it out and put it down and talk about it, which is nice. I hope you have all enjoyed your Victober reads. I hope you're enjoying this wonderful autumnal weather. Please let me know what you're up to reading right now. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I have mentioned today. I'd love to carry on the discussion with you as well. But I will see you all again real soon. Okay, take care, bye!